All right, I see
Maybe.
where. Okay.
Okay, make co-host. There we go.
We're
Okay,
live.
I got the live stream started.
All
Oh,
right.
there it
I,
goes.
I went ahead and did it again, so I don't know how that's going to pan, but maybe that's just the meeting time. Okay, go, go, go.
Okay, yeah, live stream is going.
Okay.
Everybody's coming in. Hello, everybody.
Hi,
I'm sh
everyone.
This is Writer's Lunch, hosted by the
Writer's Lunch,
Tomeworks
where Ian's mullet
editors.
gets bigger every day.
Yes, where Ian's mullet gets bigger every day. And this week we are going to be talking with Ian about the Return of the Good Guys. But before we do that, let's talk about what we're doing next week with Anna.
Oh yeah, next week is me. That's right. Yeah, next week I'm finishing up my three-part series about magic and technology and fiction. And so I'll be talking about the amalgam in part three of this series, which is combining technology and magic in like sci fantasy genres. So it should be a fun time. Hope to see you guys back here.
And if you're interested in part one or part two, you can follow us on YouTube with our relatively toddler-esque or baby channel since we moved all our recordings over there from Facebook. We have not populated everything, but we are trying to get our backlog up. However, Anna's previous two in her series on magic and technology are there under our live streams. I will put a link in the chat to that channel in just a moment. But without further ado, Ian, talk
Yeah.
about the good guys.
Yeah, absolutely. It's gonna be an interesting day. So we're gonna talk about the return of the good guy, which you'd think would be a pretty boring topic, but as I started to work on this, it kind of grew and enveloped. But before we get started, I am Ian Michael Everett. I'm a Houston-based fantasy sci-fi horror-ish writer. I write a superhero web serial called the Megajewel series. It was formerly Inheritors, which was a top 50 of all time web serial on top web fiction. I'm an editor with the Tomeworks Editing Collective. I play a lot of D&D, and I have experience with martial arts through Muay Thai. So yeah, that's pretty much me in a nutshell. So I want to talk a bit today about uh, the good guys, and to do that, we're going to talk about if you haven't seen the new Superman movie, we're going to be talking a lot about that. So, I don't want spoilers for that. Here's your fair warning, because I will be discussing that pretty extensively. But it's been out for a couple weeks, and the moratorium for spoilers is rapidly expiring. So, but without further ado, what is a good guy? So for our purposes, I'm going to call the good guy throughout this to avoid, gendering this because I'm also going to bring up example of women characters that fill this role. But we're going to call them the Paragon, which is a morally upstanding protagonist, which is sometimes called the ideal hero or Paragon or Cape if you're referring to superheroes who acts honorably, cares about other people, even the villain sometimes, and might struggle to find the right choice, but will find it in the end. Um, this character is, a fairly well-known archetype. Like this is probably one of the older archetypes, a hero that just treats everyone with compassion, does the right thing. It's pretty in as long as we've been telling stories about good versus evil, this is the good guy. Um, and we're gonna use Superman a lot because Superman, I think, is pretty. He is probably what people envision when they envision this character. He very much fills that role. Um, and what I think is going to be interesting is how people have responded to Superman over the years and how our perception of good guys has changed and developed. And you can see a lot of this through Superman, which is very interesting. But often like I said, I don't just have Superman. Lyriel. I forget how to pronounce her name, but from the Sabriel series, the Abhorsen or the Old Kingdom trilogy by Garth Nix. She's a great example of a character who always tries to do the right thing and inspires others. The Paragon is often someone that does inspire other characters, and they are presented in some way as models to emulate. Uh, like I said earlier, she'll fight with honor if she has to. She will detest unnecessary force, though, and not take joy in taking life. She will oppose oppression, any sort of tyranny, any sort of domination and evil. Um, what's the word? Pretty much anything evil that she sees that hurts other people, she will oppose. And she makes the right choice even if no one is watching. There usually is not a great internal struggle within these characters. They typically know what is right and are willing to do it on screen or in their internal narration pretty much the whole time. There's not a lot of question of will they, won't they make the right decision. Their moral compass is not the thing that is in question. But there can be tension in choosing what's right in so much as you can and what it costs them and how it affects impact the world. What does it look like when they do choose the right thing, even when everything else is screaming to choose the other option? But important kind of little things about them is their goodness isn't a scam. They genuinely believe in doing the right thing and helping others. There are characters that use goodness as a cloak. These would not be paragons. These would be, you know, someone who's trying to be good to their own ends. A character I can think of that is kind of interesting. They talk a lot about this in Dune, with the Atreides kind of being very political, but also being good. But using good as a political tool, so you can call into question, are they actually paragons of anything? Um, because they're using it to their own ends, and they know what they're doing. They're very aware. Um, but with the Paragon, there isn't an extra layer to this goodness that they have inside of them. They're willing to make personal sacrifices and do the right thing, even when no one is watching it. It would be very convenient to make a different decision. I pulled superhero fiction come up in this just because I think the trope that is pretty pretty rife throughout superhero stories of the whole. There's a archetype called the Cape, which is pretty much named, which is the same thing, just with the superhero stylings, and it's big enough that it has its own trope listing and TV tropes. Um, but we will be talking about other media as well. Paladins in anything fantasy tends to fill this role. Um, but knights in shining armor, these are all kind of the same idea. So that's the good guy who, again, we'll be calling the Paragon from here on out. Um, so the title of this presentation is The Return of the Good Guy. And that begs the question, where did they go? Where they're at? Where'd they leave to? Um, the answer to that question is, well, they didn't really go anywhere, but they haven't been very popular in modern times, particularly the period from like the late 80s to the mid 2010s. These guys kind of fell out of vogue. Unambiguous good characters kind of started to fade away. Um, they're at this point they were considered an outdated or even cliche character archetype. And largely because most popular works of the last century often featured an upstanding protagonist in some way. Lord of the Rings featured Frodo, Gandalf, Aragorn as main heroes. Star Wars featured Luke Skywalker. None of these people's moral compasses were ever called into question, and they always tended to make the right decision. I know Luke probably went through some growth, but by the end of it, he's a pretty all loving paragon of compassion. Um, Death of Superman was a response to grunge. Discuss. Well, Sean, do you want to bring that up? You want to talk about that?
I mean, the way that you're positing, I would say that there's two deaths of Superman, or like issue, like times in American history since Superman has been around, that it cut off, like people didn't want the upstanding hero. And that's like the early 70s when the code went away, and really
Mhm.
just like there was Taxi Driver and all these like movies and stuff. But that didn't permeate all the way down to teenagers, I would say, or like, to comic books so much. And then there is the early 90s. And maybe it was, like disillusionment with government, or with progress or something. But like the fine, upstanding citizen was all of a sudden the bad guy,
Mhm.
and so yeah, grunge just seemed to be one of those things that got popular because, trying to be clean cut, or, like even to try hard, was not gonna work. And who's a try hard? Superman's a try hard.
Mhm. He is extremely a tryhard, and like in the most recent movie that comes up, where they comment that he is trying very hard to be good all the time. Um, it's not, the decision to do good is not what's in question, but is the act of doing good that is often kind of arduous. Um, which is very interesting, that kind of you can create tension, not necessarily in somebody's moral compass, but in what it costs them to do and the challenges they experience. Superman sometimes is portrayed as a very stretched thin character, an exhausted character. So these kinds of questions are very interesting. But speaking of death of Superman, we're going to talk about the 1993 was the year Superman died and Venom got his own series. Just keep that in mind. And I think that's pretty that's pretty indicative of where things were headed. Anti-heroes and villain protagonists started to emerge and become very popular, morally gray characters in response to unambiguously good guys. You had stories like A Song of Ice and Fire, Watchmen, Breaking Bad, Pirates of the Caribbean, and Dexter. A lot of some of these, some of these were, parodies of things that people were observing. Others were just, in my opinion, indictments of certain cultural zeitgeists. Um, and then others are just because sometimes a morally great character is fun. Like Pirates of the Caribbean, I don't think Jack Sparrow was saying anything super intriguing. But Jon Snow, for instance, being a counter to Aragorn, is a deconstruction of the hidden heir chosen one. Or, Walter White, a man making evil choices for what he believes are the right reasons, which I'll talk a bit later, but they are largely driven by toxic masculinity and his ego, his need to be respected. Um, so, I mean, that is kind of what started to come into vogue. And you also saw later, I think this is more started around this time, but it developed into something a little more nuanced with a lot of these guys themselves are getting deconstructed um, into into anti-heroes, into villains in and of themselves. Um, Superman, for example, went through The Dark Knight Returns, where he is merely an agent of the US government and is willing to be their strongman because he views their authority as rightful and the best thing to do. Injustice viewed it shows a Superman that snapped and been through enough bad things to impose his own order upon the world rather than respecting, people's freedoms or anything like that. So it's this examination of like lawful good when law supersedes good, or for Homelander, who is a parody of Superman, the realistic version of human flaws and narcissistic personality traits. What would a real person with these powers, who's kind of an asshole, what would that do to corrupt him? And it would make him a lot worse than he normally would be without those powers. But yeah, these are the kinds of things that started to take the spotlight. And I think there's this very recent trend, and I'm pointing to, the new Superman, but also some things that people talked about in media where, we've had a couple of decades of like, bad guys being the kind of big thing, being in vogue, the anti-hero that always, maybe he kills people, but he gets the job done or whatever. These kinds of morally dubious characters. And I think in a little bit recent history, the last couple of years, there's been this kind of return to people wanting to see unambiguously good characters. I think the new Superman movie is pretty indicative of that. I'm trying to think of some other examples. I think weirdly enough, I think the on Rings of Power, Lord of the Rings new series. There's this desire to, you get the proto hobbits and proto whatever that character is, Captain America. Captain America is interesting to me because he's from this time period of obviously his inception is he's a very Superman-esque character. And his moral compass is never called into question. But during the MCU era, I feel like there is a lot of ambiguity about him and how he was willing to lie to Tony to protect his friend and stuff like that. Arguably decisions that were not the most morally upstanding. Now, I do think he is still probably the most morally pure character. But there's a lot of instances of like, for instance, him choosing to go back and, he gets the ending that is kind of selfish in the MCU, while Iron Man is the one who ends up laying down his life. Spoilers for a movie that is, I think, like 8 years old at this point. Um, but you there, I noticed this in the MCU where he was often ridiculed, or the Boy Scoutism was portrayed very, very tongue in cheek. And this is a distinction I noticed recently. uh if you contrast some of the scenes of like Captain America's potty mouth with Superman's kind of old school lingo, you get this kind of interesting dichotomy of how we're viewing this moral puritanism almost, where the other characters start to make fun of Captain America for saying "damn" one time or something like that, and then I think this was in not Civil War but Age of Ultron. Um, but then in the new Superman, you have these deliberate scenes of Superman saying the funniest, like, gosh dang it, like stuff like that. Like there's obviously someone very sanitizing themselves. And that's just kind of the way he is. But I think that I don't know, for me, that is kind of uh indicative of how we've gone to treating these characters differently in like over this decade, if that makes sense. But like I said, the modern response very recently has been to kind of push back on this idea that, villains are sexy, or anti-heroes are more compelling than good characters. Um, Vince Gilligan, who wonderful creator of Breaking Bad, probably one of the best shows of all time of the 2010s. For me, I think it is the best show of all time in the 2010s. Um, he created Walter White, who I think most of us can agree is probably one of the most old television characters created. Just in terms of his impact on the story and on the other characters. He created this guy that is kind of seen as is remembered as one of the all-time great characters, but also definitely someone who made extremely evil and vile choices and caused the death of people. He poisoned children. He caused the death of his friends. He basically sold his partner into to torture indentured servitude. Like there's, I mean, there's just so many things you can talk about. You know, he forced his family with emotional terrorism. He kidnaps a baby. There's so many things he does that are just outright evil. Um, so it's very interesting to see then that Vince Gilligan very recently, this as of this year, was talking about how he felt that he wanted to be celebrated for creating someone a bit more inspiring. Uh, he said, and this is where this is going to go political. This is going to go interesting directions. He said, it's time to say that out loud because we are living in an era where bad guys, the real life ones, are running amok. Bad guys who make their own rules, guys who, no matter what they tell you, are only out for themselves. Who am I talking about? Well, it's Hollywood, so guess. But here's the weird irony. In our profoundly divided country, everybody seems to agree on one thing. There are too many real life bad guys. It's just that we're living in different realities, so we've all got different lists. As a writer, speaking to a room full of writers, I have a proposal. It certainly won't fix everything, but I think it's a start. I say we write more good guys. For decades, we've made villains too sexy with Vader and Hannibal Lecter. Viewers everywhere, all around the world, uh, they like that attention. Here's this badass. I want to be that cool. And when this happens, the fictional bad guys stop being the precautionary tales they were intended to be. God help us, they've become aspirational. And maybe what the world needs now are some good old-fashioned greatest generation types who give more than they take. Musing how nice it was here to hear about heroes and acts of kindness during the recent LA wildfires. Um, and yeah, Anna, you make a good point. The real life bad guys would be criticized for being cartoonish if we saw them in fiction. And I think that's something that the new Superman did pretty well with Lex Luthor. He seems pretty he still seems to be as pointedly a satire of the modern billionaire capitalist as he was, you know, back when he was first created. He's reflecting the new times, but he is still the same kind of character, and he's still satirizing the same role in society. I say role with very heavy quotation marks. Uh, so I spent a long time when I was looking at this and putting together this kind of proposal or this presentation. I was very I came across um a lot of the online dialogue around the new Superman movie, and it got me thinking: are paragons woke? The answer may surprise you, because according to you're going to see a lot of here, there's a lot of conservative think pieces about how Superman has suddenly become woke. That the critical drinker, who I don't recommend ever watching his channel, is just a alt-right chud who didn't just an insane man. And then obviously I've got Ben Shapiro here. I've got Dean Cain, Steven Crowder. It is strange. There's such visceral reaction to Superman, the new Superman. Makes me wonder, oh, how did they get the impression? One, if you watch a lot of these reviews, they talk a lot about how the old version of Superman was more in line with them, and the classic Superman, this new Superman, he's too woke. He helps a squirrel and uh, Middle Eastern people. That's bad or something. And that is a lot of what it comes down to. But this kind of idea of wokeness, of railing against, these kind of corrupt government or corrupt businessmen. But I'm gonna keep going because the examples keep going. I've seen a lot on this around the the new Superman. There's a lot of people that were super huge Snyder Bros, and they're super big fans of the work, and They really liked that take on Superman, despite that Superman not really being in line with comic book Superman at all, and more closely if Snyder had finished his however many movies he was going to make, would have been a much more like an Injustice Superman rather than the actual Superman. Um, there's these guys that think uh, that Superman's most important character's trait is some sort of like stoicism, or he never gets beaten in a fight ever. He never takes any hits, and he just always keeps going. For example, you can see a couple of these guys where, the opening sequence of the Superman movie features Superman losing a fight for the first time in that actual universe. And we see him in a very vulnerable and weak state. He's bleeding, he's hurt. Um, and that shot has been taken so many times, and like a bunch of Snyder bros going, look, he's hurt, he's not strong like the previous Superman. um so you get this idea that if paragons are not like physically strong, they're not paragons to these people, right? To someone from this worldview, this Superman is not a paragon. This Superman's a sniveling woke baby. Um, and the kind of interesting, and what I want to take it back to, a lot of these people do this thing. If you've heard of the Sigma male trends, um, there's this uh, uh, there's this idea of, for me, what I've observed a lot is, in the cultural narrative, there was a kind of toxic masculinity, of course, right? Like that's not that's not a unknown thing to anyone, but some of these things that people idolize, these Sigma males, or the previous Superman aura farming over suffering people, or Walter White being cool and intelligent or whatever, when you actually watch any of, you realize that these are not people to emulate for any reason. Um, but I have seen this, and I think it's, Superman's pretty emblematic of this. There's this response, and I saw it in the conservative response to talking about, oh, classic Superman was better. If you watch Ben Shapiro's kind of take on it, he's like talking all the time about classic Superman. Obviously, he doesn't know anything about Superman, and I don't know if he's ever actually watched any of the previous Superman movies or read any of the comics. I would highly doubt it, based on what he talks about not really being true. Um, but I think there's this kind of response of, they see a man who is able to always save the day, isn't questioned by anyone, is universally loved and respected despite, not really sometimes doing anything, or just being like, this is what is in their head. And that's why I think Walter White's a great counterexample to this, this idea of the conservative paragon, where, he's a great satire. He's talking about a man provides, it's all very this kind of toxic patriarchal attitude that drives him to make some of the most evil decisions that a TV character has ever made. Um, but some of these pictures drive me wild. Um, but you do see a lot of, you're not supposed to idolize them. A lot of these characters are these like toxic male characters that get thought of as sigmas, um, even though a lot of them are deeply broken people in some way or another, and are willing to do very morally ambiguous things. And some of these same people that are going, why isn't my Superman invulnerable? Why is he getting beaten in a fight? And why is he, involving himself in what is clearly a metaphor, or a kind of a uh, thematically inspired by the Russian-Ukrainian war slash occupation of Gaza. So it's kind of interesting to see that these are kind of the same. The Venn diagram is a circle. Um, but yes, it does come back to incel culture, as Anna says. Um, but that is to get to the next point, which is to say that I think paragons are deeply political characters, and they can be very deeply political characters. And if you're going to do a paragon right, they're going to be a very deeply political character. Like we were talking about Ben Shapiro, in his review, these are real words that he said. He was like, oh, he doesn't even say truth, justice, and the American way. My Superman stands for freedom and liberty and private property and free speech. And every everyone was like, I don't think you know what Superman's about. The White House posted a picture of Superman Trump. Um, the classic, like we talked about this, but letting an objectivist direct Superman movies. Ayn Rand fan did not produce a very accurate Superman, produced a Superman that spent more of his time aura farming than he did helping people. Um, the clips of him jumping over a tanker to let it hit a building and explode. Um, and you contrast that with the shots of Superman in the new movie going out of his way just to prevent a girl from getting overrun by a bunch of from dying horribly, and then saving a squirrel from getting crushed, saving a dog from getting crushed. He cares deeply about all the life around him, while Snyder's Superman does not. But it is this Superman, the Superman that does not care about life, that is sitting there. He's like this unquestionable God. Kind of is the one that a lot of these incel people point to. These toxic masculine people point to as the Superman for them. That's my Superman. And that Superman is not a paragon. That Superman is not the paragon that we see when we're looking at, when you take out the lens and you look at the tropes and you look at this character. He is not making always the most good decisions. He is not going out of his way to help people or to minimize unnecessary violence. He's of a spectacle. Um, but I think that is why he is kind of this figure for the far right, because he is not a paragon. Um, But to response to Ben Shapiro, DC actually changed his Superman's slogan recently. Truth, Justice, and the American Way was a slogan for a while, but this was invented for the Adventures of Superman in the 1950s during the Red Scare. He didn't even say it in some of the other Superman movies, and it was definitely more part of the advertising in the 40s and 50s, aligning with war effort and anti-communist sentiment. So you see Superman as a paragon becomes reflective of the political climate of his times. The things we're scared of, the things we think are bad, or the not even the things we think are bad, although I think that it is inspired by the cultural zeitgeist. But the the way that the writers thought things were bad, or were trying to cater to that. But now we see that DC wants to update his slogan to be truth, justice, and a better tomorrow. And that this kind of idea of him representing specifically the American way is not something that is inherent to Superman. Some ideas that are inherent to Superman, him fighting against corrupt businessmen, him helping everyone that he comes across, him standing up for the little guy. These are the things that are more in line with Superman's character from the beginning. Um, so, in looking at all this, and now you can see why I have been arguing that it is a very political thing to be a paragon, and including a paragon in a work is very political, and it's not going to just throwing them into your work without any consideration of certain things is not going to make them a paragon. It's going to make them a very flat, boring character, like you know, it's it's going to make them. I mean, even look back at like Star Wars, right? Luke Skywalker. It is going to you look at him and you look at the side he's on. He's on the side of a bunch of rebels fighting against a fascist space government. That's not an accident. That is very purposeful. And Luke Skywalker is this kind of paragon of a good person that jump in and fight for the good cause and stick up for the little guy, remember and help people. Um, that's not an accident that media would portray that as somebody, going against a fascist government. Uh, Not to talk too much about the Harry Potter movies, but or the Harry Potter works, but the uh, the Dementors and oh God, what's his name? Voldemort are very clearly patterned after like this kind of similar, uh, similar idea. There's eugenicists in their number. There's, they all very, very where, uh, uh, they're clearly very inspired, I think, in my opinion, by the kind of fascist authoritarian racist element. And it's kind of weird. You see the good guys fight against that. Um, so I'm kind of rambling at this point, but I think it is for me going to lead into the next points where when you are writing um, a paragon without a question of morals is not a paragon. To be morally upstanding, one needs to be in a situation of moral consideration. You have to ask ethical questions for a character to demonstrate their ethics. I've got Lucy from Narnia, and Lucy actually is considered an example of the all-loving hero. She forgives very easily the people that have wronged her. But for her to forgive them, she has to have been wronged or in situations where wrong has been done. So you can't really just put somebody who's good in a story and then have like uh, this kind of vague force for them to oppose. The instances of wrongness that Lucy responds to in the story are very specific to her. She gets betrayed by Tumnus. She gets betrayed by Edmund, and she forgives them. So for her to demonstrate that forgiveness and that compassion, she has to herself have been personally wronged, or she has to be in a situation where there is this kind of very complex thing that happens specifically to her or impacts people around her. Um, a paragon isolated from a community is not a paragon. And I think this is the big thing that I see with the Snyder version of Superman, where we don't really get like the only shots we get of him like actually saving other people is like he's just kind of there for a second. They just want to show him like, looking cool and floating over them. But there's not like a lot of scenes in where he is deliberately deliberately, we see him in community outside of, say, Lois Lane, or occasionally being kind of cool with some of the other Justice League members. But we don't see him a lot. He just kind of stands alone, this big, isolated statue. Um, and I think that is why he is not a paragon because he is so isolated. He is set on such a high pedestal. He stands on a mountain above everyone else. But the reason that the new Superman feels much more like a paragon is because even though he does have all this incredible power and he is still that same character, he steps down from that pedestal. He comes down and he is in community with people. We see it, for instance, when, we see him get beat and he falls down. Other people come in to pick him up. He talks to people. He takes care of people. Um, you have to have other people in your story for them to take care of. Like it can't just be this isolated in their head. Oh yes, I am making all the right decisions. If there aren't people involved in those decisions, then they're not going to be there's not going to be a moral consideration. Um, how I this is kind of an interesting this was a point that I feel like it was a very big point. But in a deeply political and complicated world, a paragon is going to be complicated and political in turn. They may not question their decisions internally, but they will probably encounter opposition, ridicule, slander, and consequences. They will pick sides, and they will always pick the little guy in their sides. You know, Luke Skywalker is on the side of the rebels. Superman is on the side of um, the Jaranpur, the kingdom that's getting in, or the nation that's getting invaded. He picks the side where people are going to die and people are going to get hurt. They have no power to defend themselves. But this action in that movie is considered deeply political, and a lot of people saying that Superman is bringing America into war. He's representing America. Some of these interesting questions about what is the moral responsibility of Superman to save everyone or to save people on the other side of the world that aren't in America. But a lot of stories sidestep this by having most of the drama set in America. Um, but I do want to say that I don't think they characters are immune to being duped or tricked or manipulated into working for, like, say, a government authority, or someone that they think is a good character but has nefarious intentions. But I think if the story doesn't deal with them uncovering this deception and acting against it, that they've unwittingly failed to be morally upstanding. I think that geopolitical questions can and should come up for them to address. Oh, went too far. Um, so a paragon who defends the harmful status quo is not a paragon. If a paragon sees oppression, the right choice for them is simple: oppose the structure that creates that oppression. IRL, I think this applies to imperialism, capitalism, racism, totalitarianism, colonialism, fascism. A morally good character, a morally upstanding character can't support these things. It just does not jive with the ideology that they would hold, which, to treat other people with compassion. Uh, and that kind of comes down to that whole, I've seen it where people are like, well, what if when he fights against the fascists or whatever, is bad because he's doing violence to them, and then you get into the tolerance of intolerance paradox. Uh, so, but I think, if you're going to have a paragon, that paragon is going to challenge harmful systems in the story. Um, and it may cost them. They may get ridiculed. They may face consequences for doing so. One real life example that I can think of is Greta Thunberg, where she pretty unambiguously just stands for climate change, does stuff, and yet she gets ridiculed all the time by people that have vested interest in not seeing anything change. That's just a real life example I can think of. But I don't have a lot of time left, unfortunately. But I do want to leave with a kind of a final question, which is, what would an utterly good person in your story look like? Do they have their own convictions? Do they pick sides in conflict, or do they just kind of stand back and not weigh in or try to be diplomatic? Or could anyone of any ideology or stance believe that this character represents them? And it is my position that if you write a paragon right, no, anyone of any political stance or ideology could not believe that they represent them. And that's why I think that Superman 2025 is a paragon, and why you are seeing people rail against him so viciously in the the media. But that is pretty much the I feel like I raced through that. I did see a lot of good discussion in there, so in the comments. But I guess I will leave the floor open if anyone else wants to weigh in or talk.
Um, Thank you, Ian. And I definitely do feel that this kind of character is in fits and starts coming back. Um, One thing I have to say is it feels like every 30 years, like the culture just goes back and forth. And I learned this working in fashion back in the day, and like the a lapel, would get smaller and smaller and then get wider and wider, and it just happens in a rhythm. But this time, as it's coming back, there's so many fits and starts. And the anti-hero, the same universe, Peacemaker, is so strong still. But it's becoming a parody of itself, Um, uh, it's interesting the dovetail with kind of like as you say, like incel manosphere culture, because it feels like if you're like, I want a Paragon to come back, some of those righties are going to hear you and be like, damn right. So
Yeah.
the separation, or the no, no, that's not what I mean kind of thing, is really interesting. Like if you're building a new hero, a new good guy, how do you find I don't know, a place to have that and still be one, which I think that you're expressing feels like the world should be equitable,
Hmm.
and does that go back to, the origin of Superman? Cavalier and Clay, very good fiction book, but roughly about the comic book inventors of Superman and where they were coming from, trying to
Hmm.
write injustice and being Jewish writers in the 1930s in America,
Hmm.
and trying to create this character that could essentially, in a way, defend them, in fiction, but still very powerful symbol. I so like that, that inside outside, of why you need a paragon is sometimes you're fighting against like a massive problem. And I think that in society today, we're fighting against a massive problem.
Yeah.
And so the possibility of this coming back and being an example, um, maybe it can sidestep the whole woke not woke controversy.
Yeah.
It is it possible for Paragon to be something that transcends both sides because they both have an affinity for it? Where can you know I where can a character find likes on both sides?
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I think it is really interesting to ask that question. That was kind of what it ended up inspiring the direction this went of, why can I watch a character on the screen and go, that is an unambiguously good character, and then see a bunch of, a response of, the manosphere or whatever, um, that is pretty vitriolic, is pretty condemning. They talk about how he's woke or whatever. It's just interesting that, two sides can see a similar character and say, this is a paragon, and then another side, yeah, or if they try to make it too centrist, right, Chris, they'll, it'll feel like a Hallmark movie. It won't feel like a character with convictions, which is interesting. Um, see here. Betty, I'm watching the Vinland Saga, which I'm wondering if the main character is a paragon or not. He's part of a group that kills people to get money and participates in war, but he only cares to duel the leader and avenge his father. I would say that right there is not a paragon character, but my understanding of the series is that he eventually does step into that role. I don't think a character is forever locked into one role or another. I think, obviously there are some characters that are always paragons, but I do think a paragon is something a character could become. I think, it's one of those things that, like, and that would be interesting to see someone become that character, to become, to go through the moral challenges, uh, but the idea of, I think, Vinland Saga, which I haven't read entirely, but if I understand, eventually he does end up taking this kind of pacifist route, where he rejects a lot of these things, and he kind of decides to take a path that is very hard. And for me, that is kind of a Paragon attribute. Um, but I definitely don't think it's like, immutable, that a character can be, can take on Paragon attributes and become that role, but they may not start that way. I am just about out of time, unfortunately. I've got some work stuff to do after this, but I do think this is a very big conversation, and a Paragon character in a novel I'm writing that is a snake. That's so funny. But I think that is where we will end it today. I thank everyone for their time, for listening to me ramble about politics for the last hour.
So I do want to thank you. This has been really fun. We did talk about Anna's event already, but I messed up because Anna's event is not next week, about the amalgam of magic and tech. Her event is the week after. Next week, we will be talking about how to avoid offensive language and also just getting educated on words that are really ingrained in the English language that we use without realizing that they're offensive. And that'll be with Daphne Strassard. So I'm adding our Eventbrite in order for you to be able to sign up for any of those if you have not yet. And I just want to say thank you, Ian. If there's something that you would like to, re-listen to, or if you are sitting back from this conversation and would like, I want to go over that again just so I can think about it later, by all means, visit us on our YouTube channel, which is YouTube.com/Writers Lunch, I believe. I'm going to go grab that from the chat. Because this was a lot to think about. As you said, it did get kind of political. I don't think it got political in a bad way. Um, but it is a lot to think about how politics and the way society has changed around us impact how we write and what we want to write about. So again, if you would like to go back and watch, this will be under our live streams on our YouTube channel. Ian, thank you so very much. Hey, if people want to find you or your writing or your other endeavors, where should they find you?
So my main story, the first book of the Megajewel series is on the megajewelseries.com. You can read it totally free. So if you want to, me attempting to write a character that has the same kind of moral compass, um, you can find it there. It's superhero fiction, very inspired by that. And one of the things that people have said, I got a review that, it said most people don't. I saw this in the review where someone was like, the boys, I'm tired of like heroes being portrayed as, kind of, bad people, or, like corrupt government officials or whatever. And that is definitely a part of my story. But then they were like, but the main character is like so aggressively committed to helping other people that, at least for me, the story was enjoyable, even with like seeing superheroes that are bad people. I get to see like the main character try to be a good person all the time. As I was like, I think that was what I set out to do. So if that's the kind of character you're interested in, check it out.
Thank you so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day, everybody. And we'll see Ian again. Hopefully the last week of this month
Mhm.
at our AMA on humanizing non-human characters.
Yeah.
Yeah.